So I think you've heard something about the history of what occurred in Jerusalem that has brought about the current situation that we now face. In particular, I think you heard from Dr. Karmi, whose book, which she titled In Search of Fatima, is, to my mind, one of the very best historical accounts of what occurred as a first-person account. It's a very difficult book to read. I was depressed for months after reading it, I would say. But I can't blame Dr. Karmi for the historical facts that she recounted in the book. What I would like to talk about is how the status of Jerusalem was considered at the time that the United Nations took over the story from Britain. And it really started actually with the Special Committee on Palestine that was formed in 1947 to make a recommendation, which committee actually conducted its meetings at the YMCA building in Jerusalem and told the members of the committee, all of whom were neophytes in the situation, what they thought would be the likely positive outcome if there was to be a Jewish state. But that progressed then, of course, to the General Assembly, which then adopted Resolution 181. But what I find most interesting is that the issue of Jerusalem was considered very carefully at the time that Israel applied for membership in the United Nations in 1949. And Abba Eban, who was representing Israel there, was pressed very strongly on the issue. He was pressed on two issues. One was repatriation of refugees, and the second was Jerusalem. Because there was great concern at the United Nations that Israel was not going to go along with the idea of an internationalized Jerusalem, the Corpus Separatum, as it was called in Resolution 181. And in order to become a member of the United Nations, first you have to be a state, and second, you have to be a state that is peace-loving. So they were quizzing Abba Eban to decide whether they could determine that Israel was a peace-loving state, given the fact that it had just expelled the bulk of the population of Palestine and was not allowing them to return, and that it was making moves to assert its control over Jerusalem. So Abba Eban was asked in the General Assembly, this is actually called the Ad Hoc Political Committee of the General Assembly, which dealt with the membership application of Israel in May of 1949. These hearings actually make very good reading. I would recommend them to anyone who is seriously interested in the legal status of Jerusalem, because Abba Eban was asked, well, do you have a claim to Jerusalem? And he said, the question of sovereignty has not been finally settled and will be settled perhaps at the fourth session of the General Assembly. It will not be for the government of Israel alone to determine that issue of sovereignty. All we can do will be to propose formally certain solutions of our own. So he was saying that Israel might propose that it should have sovereignty, but that the decision would be that of the General Assembly. He was further asked a question relating to the UN Charter, which has a provision, Article 2, Paragraph 7, that says that matters that are within the domestic jurisdiction of a state shall not be a subject for consideration by the United Nations. And he was asked whether that applied to Jerusalem, namely whether Israel considered that Jerusalem was a domestic matter. And here's Abba Eban's answer. I do not think that Article 2, Paragraph 7 of the Charter, which relates to domestic jurisdiction, could possibly affect the Jerusalem problem, since the legal status of Jerusalem is different from that of the territory in which Israel is sovereign. So Abba Eban was giving very clear answers here that Israel was not claiming sovereignty over Jerusalem. And despite the qualms of some of the members of the ad hoc political committee, there was a vote taken to admit Israel to membership. Now, some have argued that since Israel gained membership essentially by deception, that its membership in the United Nations is questionable. Whether that can be maintained, I'm not sure, but at least one can say that the membership was attained through definite deception, because those were clear issues that the General Assembly was worried about in order to decide whether Israel was or was not peace-loving. Now, once Israel gained membership, the General Assembly voted in May of 1949, Resolution 273 of the General Assembly, to admit Israel as a member state. By the end of 1949, David Ben-Gurion, speaking in the Knesset, said that, and this is a quote, that Jewish Jerusalem is an organic and inseparable part of the state of Israel, and the Knesset thereupon voted to make Jerusalem the seat of government for Israel. So within a matter of months, the commitment that had been made by Abba Eban was forgotten, and a claim was made to Jerusalem. Ben-Gurion referred in this quote, as you heard, to Jewish Jerusalem. Jewish Jerusalem only because the Arab population had been forced out. There had been a meeting, in fact, of the Jewish Agency leadership on the 31st of December 1947, where they planned a strategy to empty Jerusalem of its Arab population, and then they proceeded to do that along with Plan D that was implemented for the entirety of the country in the early months of 1948. So you have this initial claim to Jerusalem being made in a way that was deceptive. Then you have the control gained over the eastern part of the city, as Dr. Chamberlain has already mentioned, in 1967. And that led to some serious discussion, again in the General Assembly. In the summer of 1967, the General Assembly held an emergency special session on the question of the 1967 hostilities, and in particular dealt with the question of Jerusalem and whether Israel was now going to claim sovereignty over the eastern part of the city. And the major speech there was made by Britain's Foreign Secretary, George Brown, who warned Israel against claiming East Jerusalem. And George Brown, while he had not said much in the Security Council, was of the clear view that Israel had been the aggressor in the 1967 war. That's something which, as Dr. Chamberlain has mentioned, isn't critical as an issue in terms of Israel's sovereignty, because even if one takes territory in self-defense, that does not lead to a claim for sovereignty. However, according to Abba Eban, the speech of George Brown made the Israeli cabinet very fearful that the General Assembly or the Security Council might take some action to keep Israel from making a claim to East Jerusalem. And according to him, it was George Brown's speech that inspired the Cabinet of Israel to act more quickly than it might have otherwise to extend the application of Israeli law to East Jerusalem, which it did by a regulation that was issued on the 28th of June, 1967. And Abba Eban, who was in the uncomfortable position of having to defend Israel in the General Assembly special session from criticism that Israel was claiming the territory, he says in his memoirs that he tried to get the cabinet to hold off a bit, but once the cabinet did act, he was a good soldier, and he went into the General Assembly and said, this is not a claim of sovereignty, even though he quite well knew that it was. He said that it was only being done, that is, the extension of Israeli law to the eastern part of the city, that was only being done for purposes of good administration. But a state that is in control of territory under belligerent occupation is not permitted to extend its own law. It's supposed to apply the law that it finds in existence at the time that it comes into control. So that was something that the General Assembly reacted to very negatively at the emergency special session. And all of that is even before the 1980 law that Dr. Chamberlain talked about, where the Knesset claimed that the entirety of the city, united, was under Israel's sovereignty. I do want to speak briefly about the reaction of states. And states generally have not considered Israel to be in a sovereign status in Jerusalem, as you already heard, either with respect to the western part of the city or the eastern part of the city. And this has come up actually in legal cases in a couple of ways. One is with respect to passports issued by governments of different countries when they have as a citizen someone who was born in Jerusalem. And in a number of instances, persons born in Jerusalem, Jewish persons born in Jerusalem, when they apply for a passport, have claimed that the little box that says country of birth should read Israel, even though they were born in Jerusalem. And there have been court cases on this in the United States and in Canada. There was one in Canada in 2005 brought by a young man named Veffer, Veffer. If you want to look it up, it's called Veffer versus Canada, which you can Google. And he claimed that he had a right to have Israel marked. He was born in West Jerusalem. That he had a right to have Israel marked in that box. The government of Canada refused. Instead, they put Jerusalem as place of birth rather than the name of any country. He was born after 1948. If he had been born before 1948, then it would have been Palestine. But the case then went into court. Veffer challenged that in court, in the federal court of Canada, and the Canadian Arab Association intervened in the case and asked me to be an expert witness on the status of Jerusalem, and I was cross-examined by the lawyer for Veffer's family as to what the status of Jerusalem was, and I essentially said that it was undecided, and so I supported the view of the government of Canada, and the court decided that way, and the decision was affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada. We had a case on this as well in the United States. The United States Congress got involved in this issue. As I'm sure you're aware, it has gotten involved in a number of issues relating to Palestine and Jerusalem. And it adopted a law in 2002 saying that the State Department should put in Israel in a passport that was being issued to a person born in Jerusalem. President Bush, George W. Bush, who was president at the time, did not approve of this, but it was put into an overall funding bill that he could not veto. So he didn't have the opportunity to veto it because he would have been vetoing all funding for U.S. foreign affairs for the year. But in any event, he said that it was an infringement on his power as the executive to decide on recognition, and that the policy of the U.S. government was that Jerusalem was not under the sovereignty of Israel, and therefore that he was not planning to comply with the law. So we've had this law in the U.S. in place since 2002, and it has never been implemented by the State Department. Just within the last few months, some members of Congress have made a request to President Trump to change the policy. As far as I'm aware, he has not made moves in the direction of doing that, which may actually seem a bit strange given what he has done with respect to the embassy. But in any event, in those two countries, you have court decisions. In the United States, this matter went to the U.S. Supreme Court, a very interesting case that you may want to read. The individual involved was named Zivotofsky. So the case is called Zivotofsky versus Kerry, who was Secretary of State at the time. And the U.S. Supreme Court essentially agreed with President Bush that this was a matter for the executive since it related to recognition of foreign governments. So you have that, and then you have the Congress passing a law to move the embassy of the United States to Jerusalem. That was 1995, but with a provision saying that the president could issue a waiver every 6 months against implementing it if the president thought that it was in the security interests of the United States to do so. So every 6 months since 1995, the U.S. president, whoever it has been, has in fact issued such a waiver, including President Trump just in December of 2017. Although at the same time, he was saying that he plans to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and now more recently has said that the plan is to do that in the very short term. But I suppose I should conclude at this point, and we can proceed with some further discussion.